In this video, we will be doing a overview / tutorial on how to use the mobile golf template available on Gumroad. At the moment, the project's set up for Unreal Engine 4.27, but there's nothing specific being used, so it should transfer to UE5. I will eventually do a transfer myself. So when you open the project, it's pretty simple. There's not a whole lot to it. The ground itself is an actor, which is just a very large mesh with a hole in it. If you go here, you can see the blueprint for it itself. And more or less all that's going on inside is here. There is a sphere collision, and it's just set for overlap all. The ball falling in, it triggers the overlap. We casted the ball to make sure that's what actually fell in it, and who knows, you might have objects you add to the level that move around and fall in there, and you don't want those to trigger it. If the ball in fact lands inside the hole, triggers the overlap, it calls the finish level from the golf game mode. At the moment, all this does is cast to the player controller, the golf player controller, checks what the stroke count is, and then prints a string to the screen. Essentially what that ends up looking like is this. You can see where it printed it right there. Here's where basically you would handle your score, your pop-up menu, and all of that. Like I said, this is a very basic, just to get you started. You know, you have a golf ball, you have a hole, and you have the interaction. So that's all the game mode handles, is basically that. The hole just handles being a hole. The ball itself, which is the next object, it's got a couple things going on with it. So if you notice, there's this arrow. As you move around the arrow, you basically tap or drag across the ball, move your cursor around, or in this case, is maybe for mobile, it'd be your finger. The arrow extends. So this arrow is actually it's a mesh that's part of the ball. And then the next thing you'll notice is when you release the ball, there's that motion, the speed trail. That's also part of this. Go to the viewport here, and you can see there's the arrow mesh, the ball itself, and then here's the particle. So in the event tick, you'll notice I have comments from everything. If there's any questions, of course, feel free to comment on the video or email me directly. Essentially what we're doing is the arrow itself will not be visible if it's not physically been grabbed. I'll show you where that's been set momentarily. More or less what we're doing, we get the linear velocity of the ball, and if it's nearly zero, that'll be true. We set it hidden. If it's not, it'll be false. It makes it visible. Custom event here that is toggled for letting the ball know that it's been grabbed. The set angle function here, or event, this is where we're setting the actual rotation of the arrow and the length and scale. We send the angle from our player controller. Everything like the grabbed and set angle, those are all set from a player controller. This way you can have multiples. Like you could drop several balls in here and you can interact with them all. The shoot impulse, this is the event that's called to actually enable the physics and launch the ball in the wanted direction. You see we have a direction here and a multiplier for adding the impulse. And that's essentially all this one is. The ball is set for being a physics actor. It does generate hits. So you could use that down here. So if you did a component hit, you could actually set like a spark here, or this is where you'd enable your sound over the ball is actually hitting surfaces, the click sound that a ball would make when it's hitting something. We have a physics material here. That's in the actual materials. You have a ball physics material and a floor physics material. And all we're doing with this is basically setting frictions and restitution, which is how bouncy it is and how dense the ball is compared to the actual weight, which I believe we're using. Yeah, we're just using the default, which is not very much, but a golf ball is kind of light. You would tweak these things to make the ball more bouncy. Some other things you could set would be like the dampening on it. The reason why these dampenings are set where they're set at is to help slow down the ball. Alright, so you see how long it kind of takes right there? Well, it's kind of distracting to the user. If they're trying to grab the ball. So what's one of the other things? It's like when the ball's moving, it's not able to be grabbed, right? We do that because it's, you know, in golf you don't want to be able to interfere with the ball as it's going. But if you set the dampening much lower, say like let's just set these to default real quick, right? And you'll see that they just keep on kind of just rolling. Yeah, and now you won't ever be able to do anything with them because they're just still constantly moving because there's no dampening on it. Alright, so the main blueprint that kind of does everything is the player controller. Generally you would do underneath the input touch, the pressed. The problem with that is I've found is you'd have to be very specific, right? So you'd have to be click on the ball exactly and then drag off of it. Which if that's what you want, that's fine, but a lot of players when they're doing games where they're flinging things like this, they kind of like to drag across it. So you just kind of drag across and the mouse catches it. And that just kind of makes for a more fun experience. So we do it in the moved, right? So when the finger, in this case the cursor, is moved, the first thing we're doing is we're verifying whether or not we've stored the golf ball reference. So if it's the initial drag across, you haven't stored anything until it's caught the ball, right? So if it's not stored, obviously we're going to drop down here to not valid, and we store the last pointer location. This part's important because we want to be able to set that angle of which way it's going to launch, as well as set up the arrow, right? So the first thing we're doing, we're setting that location, and then we're verifying that we've actually touched something under the finger, which in this case is anything blocking visibility. So the floor would technically cause this to go off too, unless you went in and changed the collision on the floor to where it doesn't block visibility. If you're not familiar with that, example is here. Under the collision presets, you'll see right here, visibility channel is blocked. Now say you had the floor, which is here, and you didn't want the floor to block that, you would go in here, you'd set this, what I like to do is set it to the closest type, and then go to custom, and you would untick, or you'll ignore the visibility. We verify that we've gotten a hit. If we haven't, then we just don't do anything. We clear the golf ball reference if it doesn't hit. We're doing that as a just in case. So if there is a hit, we're casting to the golf ball because we only want interactive hit, and we're checking to make sure that the ball is barely moving. So you can set this tolerance a much higher number, and it'll let you grab it sooner. Like right now, you've seen how it was. Like the ball has to be nearly not moving before it triggers. Okay, so if we were to change this to like 50 and go back in, you could pretty much grab the ball while it's still moving a little bit. Which if that's how you want to play, that's fine. But that's how you do that. 0.1 is what we've left it to because that kind of gives enough of a stop. So if it is in fact able to be, it's going slow enough to be grabbed, we go ahead and set the reference to it and we let it know it's been grabbed. This goes back here and sets this variable. If it can't be grabbed, we go ahead and clear the ball because we're not holding anything anyways. Alright, so once the ball has been grabbed, now this is true, coming off, moved. So if it is valid, we more or less take the last pointer location that we set here, the current pointer location, and we're going to minus them from each other. And what this does is this gives us a directional vector, more or less letting us know which direction the finger is versus the ball is pointing. In this case, because we're only doing top down, we don't really care about the Z angle. So we're only going to set the X and the Y because it's, it's a top down game, so X and Y. So we're setting that angle, which again comes back here into the golf ball blueprint, and this is how we're changing the rotation of that arrow and changing the length of it based on that angle, and then making sure it's set held. Okay, so that's from the movement part. On release, clearly we want to check to make sure we are, in fact, pulling our finger off the screen or let go of the mouse. If we have a hold of the golf ball, then we continue on and it's released. We're shooting, which we do the same thing. We take the last pointer, the new pointer, minus it, and we're going to clamp the vector. So this number is essentially how far away your finger has moved from the original location of the ball. So you could not clamp this, and essentially as far back as you draw your finger. So ideally, you could just set a maximum, which is what we're doing here with this clamp, to where it's like something like 1, and then you just go with a multiplier. No matter how far you pull your finger, it's always going to release at the same power. But in this case, you've seen how we have the arrow extending. So we're going to give in the impression that the further you pull your finger back, the further, the harder the ball is going to release, which in golf, that's what you want, because you want to be able to pull back a little bit to drop, or to hit the ball lightly. Because imagine if every single hit was this, right? If every single hit was that, then you would literally have this issue right here. The ball just bouncing off the hole. So we give it a max and a minimum, and this number I've particularly set based on the range that causes this maximum length on the arrow, just so it coincides. That's all that number there means. And then the power, which is this multiplier, again, this is a number. You could probably convert this into a variable so you could adjust it on the fly on the level and make it a little bit easier for fine-tuning. I found that this number worked best for what I wanted the feel to be, but you could set this to something crazy like 50, and now every time you hit this thing, it's just going to launch. Or you could set it to less, it's like 0.1, and now even your maximum hit's not that hard. But like I said, let's do something like 5. 5 will give you a little bit more power. That might still be too much. Yeah, 5's still kind of crazy. So 3 might be a good play number. Yeah, 3 kind of works well too. Oh, I'll say too hard, but yeah, right here. So back that off. If you didn't have that clamp and you just had a solid number, you'd never be able to do that putt well. So I'm going to leave it at 1.5. But if you wanted to go super arcadey, that 3 would be a good number, maybe even 4. So after it shoots, it tells it it's no longer being grabbed. So essentially what that's doing is telling the arrow to stop being visible. We're adding to our stroke count, which we have the variable here. We're using that for the end game, where it basically checks the stroke count to let you know how many times it took you before you landed that putt. We're clearing the reference to the ball, and then we're setting the last pointer location again. So that's, you've released your finger from the screen. Here in the begin play, we're just going ahead and setting for the cursor to be visible. That's just strictly so that when you're in game on PC, you can see your cursor. There is another part in the level blueprint. So in the level blueprint, alright, so then under the event tick, there's a lot going on here, but it's actually simpler than it seems. We're taking the hole and the ball, we're getting both of their locations, right? We're making an array from it, just so we can take advantage of this, and we're averaging between the two. Basically, we're getting the center of where those two are. Here, we're taking the distance between the two, and we are clamping that distance between 125 and 200. What we're doing with that is that's setting the camera height for zooming in and out, which happens, you can see where the camera kind of pulls in. That's that number there. You can play with it, but this is what I found to work best. So we're taking those numbers and we are creating a new target with it. So we're taking the camera's current location, putting it in current, and we're interpolating between these two locations. So what we got going on here is, if you recall, we stored the original location of the camera. The reason for that is we know that this location of the camera is best for showing the entire course that we want to show. So when we get close, we want to give people the option to have that fine detail, but when we get far enough away, we want to be able to see the whole course. Otherwise, you'd never be able to find this ball. So we're taking the camera location and this location, and if it's less than this distance, then we're selecting which vector. If the distance is greater than 100, then we want to use the original camera location. If it's less than that, then we want to use this interpolated vector here. And then just to make things smooth, we interpolate between this vector and the current actor, just so that it's got a nice smooth action. So right there, you see how it just fell in, and then we zoom way out, it zooms out nice and smooth. If we didn't interpolate again, then it would just snap to the camera location, which we don't want because it's really jarring, so we want a nice in and out. Realistically, you could actually probably just get rid of this interpolation here and just plug these values right in, and then it would just do it anyways. So this is kind of non-needed, but I'm just leaving it there for now. That's basically everything. You have the interaction of the ball via the player controller, the ball handling the grab event and the disabling of the particle system. Then you have the whole blueprint, which is handling the interaction with the ball, and then the game mode, which the whole blueprint is calling to basically finish the level. That's really the four blueprints. There's only one level, but that should be enough to get you started, really. Like I said, it's super simple. If I got enough support for it, I could do a series on how to convert this into a full-fledged game for Android. I guess it would be for iOS as well, but I'm primarily an Android developer. That's it. That's all I've got for you. I'll update this if I find any bug issues or things I think could probably be smoother, like the camera here. This was before didn't have this extra interpolation, so it was very jarring. So I've since added that. If you feel like there's things that aren't commented well enough or things that you would like to see more of, just, again, comment on this video or email me. You can do that via Gumroad or through contact@sanitariumdesigns.com. Also have a template that's going to be coming that's kind of based off of the golf template, and that is basically a pool game, which is pretty far from being done. The physics need some work. But that is all I've got for you. Thank you for your time.